Okay, folks, it is now, we're going to begin the 6:30 business meeting. Unlike most meetings, we did not have a closed meeting that we have to come out of, so we're in open session, simply rejoining. We'll begin the 6:30 business meeting with a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Councilors, any announcements? So I just wanted to, I should have done this at the last meeting and things got away from me and I didn't. I wanted to thank the police department for handling the move out of Market Street Park with a lot of delicacy and a lot of pizza. I think that the pizza was an important piece of the diplomacy that went into that made the events of the 21st of October very successful. Also, right around that time, Officer Travis Woods was seriously injured or had a stroke after an incident. And I know that there has been a lot of concern about Officer Wood. We're told that he is doing pretty well these days. Early on, he had some up days and some down days, but for the most part, the days have been up. And so we're grateful for the fact that things seem to be working out better for him and wish him all the best and certainly thank him for his service to the community. Are there any items for recognition? I don't have any proclamations this time. In that case, let's move on to the consent agenda. Ms. Thomas, would you read the consent agenda, please?
Consent agenda number 3, minutes, October 10th, joint council planning commission public hearings. 4, resolution to appropriate victim witness assistance program grant, $258,342, second reading. 5, resolution to appropriate funding from the Supreme Court of Virginia Behavioral Health docket grant, $67,792, second reading. 6, resolution to appropriate Virginia Department of Education Special Nutrition Program Child and Adult Care Food Program funding, $30,000, second reading. 7, resolution to appropriate Fire Department FY22 State Homeland Security Program Grant Award, $51,764, one of 2 readings. 8, ordinance for renewal of the Ting franchise agreement, one of 2 readings.
Okay, so we'll now take public comment regarding items on the consent agenda that were just read by the clerk. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes. If you are one of those who has pre-registered, your moment will come in a couple of minutes. It's not right now. If you have anything to talk about on the consent agenda, raise your hand, let me know. Okay, seeing nobody, is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
I move for adoption of the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further questions or comments from council? Not, please vote. Oh, and
Michael.
is Councilor Payne with us?
I am, yes, and yes.
Okay, and just for the record, we had already at 4 o'clock approved his participation remotely, so you're legal. Thank you. That passes 5-0. City manager's report. Is there a report from the city manager's office?
Just one item from me, in that I just wanted to make it clear to the public that the work plan update that I presented during the work session today, the actual document will be posted on the city manager's page, so you're free to go and visit and see what we're up to. And then I'm going to turn this over to Chrissy Hamill, our budget director, and Jason Vandiver, city treasurer, for quarterly financial report.
Good evening, Council. How are you?
Evening.
Great.
We're fine. How are you?
Fine, thank you. So we are here tonight to present to you the first quarterly report for 2024, the current fiscal year. I'll just say right up front, this is very, very early, so what we talk about today is as good as what our crystal ball tells us today. Don't take this to the bank for sure. But we have collected so far about 13% of our revenues for this year. As you will recall, we adopted a budget of $228 million, and we have revised. We meet monthly as we are developing the budget for 25, and we are working on revising those revenues. As you will see on the chart, which is on the second page of the report, the revenues continue to surpass our projections, which is both good and bad, as we like to be closer, but we'll take what we can get. Real estate tax, although our sales are down, our sales prices continue to rise. So we are seeing higher than expected revenue in personal property. With the 23 budget, we talked about with COVID, the vehicle values were high. They are declining much slower than we had anticipated. Sales and use and meals continue to outperform. This is something that we're seeing across the state. Although as of, I think last week, the state sent out something saying their revenue projections, while they have been exceeding what their budgets were, they are looking to a return to normal, whatever that means. And so as we look at these revenues, a lot of these are based on human behavior, which is a little bit hard to factor in to our projections, but we're doing the best we can. And interest income is another big one. As when we were doing projections last year, we did not anticipate interest at the rate that it is now. So when we factor all of these in, as of right now, we are looking at revenues that are exceeding our revenue projections by about $7.7 million. I caution you to say that it does not equate to a surplus. That is one half of the equation. And again, it's early on, and so we'll continue to monitor these. We'll talk about these projections a little more as we work through the 25 budget development process. But with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Vandiver for the cash report, unless anybody has any questions.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, counselors. So just moving on to the investment section of their presentation, there are a few slides. We're almost there. There we go. So this update is based on the end of the first quarter in the fiscal year, so ending September 30th. And moving on to the next slide, I'll just touch briefly on the city's investment guidelines. So the state code has a lot to say about municipalities and what they're allowed to invest in, and so obviously we follow all of those guidelines, but additionally we have internal investment guidelines that we follow, and those are more restrictive than the state code. And so primarily, we're managing towards the goals of safety, liquidity, and yield. And just as a reminder to council, the other internal restriction we have that we talked about with council several years ago is just an exclusion of any companies invested in fossil fuels. So that restriction is still in place, and that is shared with our investment managers, so they're aware of that as well. So moving on to the next slide. Monthly cash flow. So you can see there's sort of a corridor over the course of the year that our cash flow ebbs and flows. Obviously, as we approach tax deadlines, it will go higher. June is sort of the high water mark for the city's cash flow from a financial perspective, as we have real estate and personal property tax revenues coming in. And then those funds are spent down over the summer, both as CIP projects are usually underway at a higher rate, and also the fact that there are no major tax deadlines or anything like that. So we are coming into a period, November and December and January, where revenues will be increasing and cash flow will be increasing, so we'll obviously be looking to put that to work as expeditiously as we can. Moving on to the next slide. So this is just a comparison of June to September, and some of the slight changes that have occurred in the portfolio. You may notice a slight decrease in holdings in U.S. Treasuries and a slight increase in negotiable CDs and corporate notes, and that's primarily a function of the yield spread between those different types of securities. And so that's something that we discuss with our investment manager as the market changes, as we have maturities in the portfolio. They will look to invest those as advantageously as possible while still following all the investment guidelines that we have. So just to give some examples, and you, Chrissy, mentioned this, that it can be difficult to forecast interest earnings over such a long time period, especially with as much uncertainty as we've experienced with the Federal Reserve. But we have maturities that we purchased 2 or 3 years ago. They were yielding, 50 basis points, and they're being reinvested at 5.5% now for 2 or 3 years. So that's why it can be so difficult. We generally don't forecast rate increases when we're doing interest rate projections. We just kind of go with what we have at the time period. And so that's why you'll see some variations in those forecasts when it comes to budget time. I think there's one more slide. So 2 charts here. One shows our investment portfolio sort of managed to a 1 to 3 year index, and you can see that indicated here that the largest portion of our portfolio now, 43%, is invested in that 2 to 3 year time period. And so that's just an indication that we are taking advantage of those higher rates. And a lot of economists, as well as the markets, sort of forecasting that they may believe that we're sort of at the end or approaching the end of this rate hiking cycle, that we're obviously trying to lock in those higher rates where we can. And hopefully that will help us over the next few years when it comes to interest earnings on the budget. So that's the only update that I had, and I'll answer any questions if you have any.
Going back to a slide that was up during Ms. Hamill's presentation, it looks like the projected interest income for miscellaneous revenues, interest income for the FY 2024, you're thinking maybe as high as $3.6 million?
That's right. Yeah, we really
opposed to the $1 million that had been budgeted.
That's right. Yeah, that was a long time ago when we made that forecast, and yeah, there definitely been a lot of rate hikes since then. But we've sort of created a model now that we're using where, at least for the current fiscal year and the next year, we're forecasting 2 rate decreases a year, and we took those and allocated them across the balances that we have, and we feel like this is going to be a closer number going forward.
Okay. Well, I'm all in favor of an extra $2.5 million. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Vandiver?
No. Thank you also, Mike.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's good to have this report to know we're on track. Okay. Now, Community Matters. We have 8 pre-registered speakers, leaving 8 slots for additional speakers on Community Matters. If one of the first 8 speakers is unavailable, a speaker on the waiting list will be moved into that slot. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. We will now open the floor to pre-registered speakers. Our first pre-registered speaker is Jay Oshrin.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening.
Good evening.
I know you're going to be talking about jails a lot tonight, but I want to talk about something else, about the bus service. Improving the bus service in Charlottesville must become a higher priority than it currently is. The angst that many people have about traffic and parking as a result of the upzoning is a reasonable concern. That is why the construction of sidewalks and protected bike lanes, along with better bus service, must happen at the same time, not 5 years from now. It is a package deal. You cannot do one without the others. It is like the proverbial 3-legged stool. I can't cover bike ped bus in 3 minutes, so this is only about buses. Here are some things to consider. More buses, more lines, higher frequency. A transit system will be more successful if you don't need a schedule. 15-minute frequencies, 4 buses per hour, means that wait times average 7.5 minutes. The main discussion about buses is currently centered around bus fuel, but it doesn't really matter if it's not getting people out of their cars. Frequency is the main thing that will do that. Smaller buses, like the rental car buses at the airport, I know this seems counterintuitive if you want to increase ridership, but if you have more buses, they don't have to be these behemoth vehicles that are intimidating and impersonal. Smaller buses feel more accessible, more human scale. Have some fun, decorate the buses, pipe in music, make the seats comfy, make it fun to ride the bus. Call the bus drivers people movers or captains or chauffeurs. Get the kids in school to have a naming competition for the buses. Profile the captains on the city website, help people get to know them. Have a bus driver training school in town, KTEC. Pay the captains more. Current wage is about $21 an hour, which is about $42,000 a year. Not good enough. It's a tough job. First, there's the driving part. Then there's a ton of responsibility. There's also a security angle. Driving for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week is not easy. How about a starting wage of $25 with a top out at $35? Make it a sought-after job, not a necessary evil. Celebrate the captains. Maybe have a bus driving Olympics every year to showcase their driving talent. Fix up the bus stations, for heaven's sakes. How about some shade and a place to sit? A little color, too. Make it feel like you are a winner, not a loser, for riding the bus. Increase the number of hours that the buses run. Have special routes like church buses on Sunday and shopping buses during the holidays. Every resident gets a free pass for the first year. Kids always ride free. Set up a sponsorship program for fare assistance after year 1. Give prizes to people that ride the most. Have bus locations available on your phone like Uber so you can gauge your wait time. Make it easy for bikers or handicapped people to store their wheels. Improve operational efficiency with off-board fare collection, all-door boarding, and signal priority where possible.
Mr. Osher, your time is up. Thank you. Next is Roy Van Dorn.
Thank you, Mayor, City Manager, Council. I purchased my home on Rugby Avenue about 4 years ago. With a lot of sweat equity, I remodeled and repaired the home. 4 years later, my real estate property taxes have doubled. You soon will be considering upzoning for every parcel in the city, especially the R1 zones. As envisioned, the goal is to increase density, and therefore the value of land will increase due to the potential capacity of more development. That's Real Estate 101. The benchmark for this increased valuation will be based on comparables by those homes sold with similar zoning. As we have seen, the flurry of high-density applicants, developers will select the best combination of location, lot size and capacity, and their return on investment, as they should be. Yet, as we have seen, most will not be affordable housing. However, for those of us who do not want to become developers, the impact will be higher assessments due to this development by others. I believe as part of your review of the zoning code, you owe the community a clear tax strategy resulting from the council's decision to upzone. As we all know, the statement about keeping the rate the same somehow does not mean a tax increase is simply not accurate in this case. What will happen is that the real estate tax rate may stay the same, yet the payment amount will increase. In most kitchen table conversation, that's called a tax increase. We have less, and the city takes more. Many in this community are doing with a lot less today, and part of that is the ever-increasing taxation on everything from food to homes. That is multiplied by the ravages of inflation. Speaking of inflation, I've given you an article that I asked you to read from the Wall Street Journal. This article is about the national impact of inflation is having on housing. Many have said that increased density is the primary answer for achieving affordable housing. I believe if you read this article carefully, what is clear is that the cost of housing is a national problem and not the availability of land. That simply ignores the elephant in the room. The high cost of acquisition for homeowners and developers alike have reached a crisis stage. In conclusion, I urge the council to address to the community specifically how you will plan to mitigate the certain increase in potential value based on your decision to upzone residential real estate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Dorn. Next is Lisa Drain.
Good evening, councilors. My name is Lisa Drain. I am a city resident. I've also been serving on the Albemarle-Charlottesville Regional Jail Board as your citizen representative for the past 2 years. This evening, you'll be presented with a resolution to approve almost $5 million in interim funding as the first step in the renovation of the jail. As I said when I came before you last January, I oppose sinking money into a facility with a decreasing population. At 230 people, it's the lowest in 25 years, and a building that currently has unused housing units. While I do agree that the oldest part of the jail should undergo upgrades, the ACRJ board considered doing just that in 2019, but rejected that plan in favor of undertaking a much bigger renovation project down the road, which this is. I strongly feel that the bulk of the estimated $49 million, which is really $73 million when you include interest, would be better spent on deeper funding for community organizations serving those at most at risk for entering the criminal legal system in the first place. I would like to see us change our priorities for use of taxpayer funds, but I know this won't occur until we all change our mindset about who is a criminal. It's ingrained in many of us, but I urge you to let go of the notion that some people are just evil and will never change, and therefore deserve to be behind bars. You've heard the phrase, harmed people harm people. The majority of people in the carceral system who are accused of causing harm were in fact victims of harm themselves. And of course, they're disproportionately Black, brown, and poor. Often this harm occurs as children. It could be mental or physical abuse, or even the harm caused by living in poverty, inadequate housing, a lack of opportunities, poor health care. We know there's a strong connection between this kind of childhood trauma and violence. Our current carceral system does little to alleviate harm or to rehabilitate people. More often, the system just increases trauma. If we keep putting money into this system, including the jail, nothing will ever change, and you will be complicit in perpetuating that system. Look at the troubling situation that's happening at CHS right now. If the answer to the problem is serious disciplinary actions and repercussions for those bad kids, we'll be doing the same old thing, offering only the same punitive responses to harm. And if these young people end up at the Blue Ridge Detention Center, it's just a few steps up the hill to ACRJ. So addressing the issues at CHS, which of course go much deeper than just fighting, is closely connected to how you view and fund the jail, including this renovation. Alas, I know you will likely vote to authorize the interim funding. You've toured the jail and seen the condition of the 1974 wing and of the wing of the facility. Everyone wants to feel like they're doing something good for incarcerated people by making the jail environment cleaner, nicer, more trauma-informed. But nicer cages are still cages, and human beings shouldn't be caged.
Thank you, Ms. Drain. Next is Kate Fraley.
Hi, I'd like to cede my time to Rosia Parker.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good
Welcome. I want to speak on the sign-in letter. A diverse group of community groups, reentry organizations, educational, and tenant organizations has signed on to this letter. All of these organizations have one thing in common. They work with vulnerable populations and low-income people in Charlottesville. The signers are your constituents, and they speak with one voice. We sent a copy of this letter to all of you last week. I wanted to read it now. The People's Coalition Jail Committee, Legal Aid Justice Center, and a wide range of community groups focusing on education, housing, reentry oppose the large-scale renovation of the Albemarle-Charlottesville Regional Jail. The initial estimated cost by Mosley Architects is a staggering $49 million. In 27 years, when the bond is paid in full, the carceral communities would balance, like Ms. Drain said, $72 million. This unsound use of taxpayers' dollars put future generations in debt. Punitive carceral systems like a new jail only serve to perpetuate the mass incarceration of Black and brown people, fail to keep us safe. We depend on our taxpayers to be invested in, affordable housing, which we continuously deal with homelessness. Homelessness continues to bring harm to the system because whatever situations they're in, they might continue to deal with the police. So if we continue to stop dealing with mental health, substance abuse, trauma, and tragedy that continue to oppose upon our people, if we have other resources that are put into the community as well as the jail cell, but what are they going to do when they're in there in a less amount of time? How is that specific renovation in that specific area, which is supposed to be endowed to mental health, how are they going to deal with that? Mental health could be a whole time that they're in there. So would they be in that particular room, which would be something so bright, something so beautiful, but it's only for mild to mid. So that means if it's anybody that is beyond mid, they're being sent away. So what if they come in there with a substance abuse and mental health? Is that area going to be able to treat both? No, it's only going to be able to treat mental health. They say that their staff is staffed, but I feel that because the staff is tired of sitting in the situation that they are now, that they're feeling like they're the inmates. So now they need a new renovation. So this should have been done years ago. So if we was going to have our people sitting in those cells, they should have been comfortable if they was going to be in there before now because they couldn't breathe all this time. So put yourself in the box and have an understanding what it's like to be in a cell. But it's human and humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Next is Ellen Contini Morava.
Hello, I'm Ellen Contini Morava from 225 Montebello Circle, commenting on the VERF project, the 12-story student high-rise proposed for the corner of JPA, Emmett Street, and Stadium Road. This project was applied for as a planned unit development, or PUD, a zoning category used for projects that are outside the scope of regular zoning rules. It's not a surprise that there are 2 PUD applications for student high-rises in the pipeline at this moment, because there will be no such thing as a planned unit development in the new zoning code. Developers have been exploiting the PUD category to circumvent the normal zoning rules, and they're scrambling to get their outsized projects approved before this loophole gets closed. But the VERV project doesn't even conform to the specifications for a PUD under the current code. The city staff report brought up the following conflicts. First, contrary to the city code PUD specifications, the VERV design is neither innovative, attractive, nor environmentally sensitive. Second, the architectural style is not only inconsistent with the neighborhood, but the scale is inconsistent with Charlottesville in general. Even Planning Commission members described the scale as scary at their October meeting. A further conflict with PUD specifications is that the VERV project will reduce existing mature tree canopy, which is already insufficient in this neighborhood. The city staff report also pointed out conflicts between the VERV project and the city's comprehensive plan. Staff noted the scale of the project and its negative impact on the adjacent neighborhood, and they especially highlighted the excessive height, a height, quote, that is 34 feet higher than the maximum height allowed within any of the city's zoning districts, unquote. Due to the conflicts with both the PUD specifications and the comprehensive plan, city staff concluded that they could not recommend approval of this project. The JPA neighborhood is already under siege from developers rushing to cash in on student high-rises before the new zoning code is in place. 2 have already been approved on JPA, even though UVA plans to house all its second-year students on grounds by 2030. The city doesn't need an even bigger student high-rise, especially at this location. Adding 400 cars along with bikes, scooters, 1,500 pedestrians to this congested and hazardous intersection. Our neighborhood has always been an invigorating mixture of ages and occupations homeowners and renters, but it's getting harder and harder to hang on to the stability and sense of community that makes living here worthwhile. Please reject this PUD application. And I wish you all a good Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Ms. Contini Morava. Happy Turkey Day to you, too. Next is Ruby Cherian.
Hi, I cede my time to DeMarcus Brown, who's on the wait list.
Good evening, Council.
Good evening, Mr. Brown.
My name is DeMarcus Brown, and I'm a resident of the city of Charlottesville. I was born here, I'd like to point out. And I work for the Legal Aid Justice Center, and I also represent the People's Coalition. I'm here to talk about the renovation, the request for renovation and expansion of the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail that this council was here today to consider interim funding. I would first like to point out that it is imperative that any expenditure of taxpayers' dollars, especially ones costing over $1 million, should involve community input and engagement. Community engagement and input should have been the first priority before the beginning of any process. Well, it should be the first priority before the beginning of any process concerning the jail expansion. A task force of directly impacted people, their families, and service providers and community reentry groups should have been informed of this process from the beginning. This should be done immediately. The A&E firm should develop tiered proposals laying out different options for renovation and the cost for each one. This should not be an all-out or nothing proposal. We believe in care, not cages. We are here to demand care instead of cages. Money spent on preventing incarceration is a much better use of the community's resources than one building nicer cages. This means investments of affordable housing, mental health resources, and reentry programs. Charlottesville has a housing crisis. We have all heard of our unhoused community members and the need for housing options. We need to invest in preventing incarceration, not building a better jail. We should be spending money on community services and supports to prevent people from going to jail in the first place, not by building a new place to confine them. I want to highlight that the current proposal increases the square footage of the jail, but I should point out that there are unused newer areas in the jail. 2 of the housing pods in the newer section of the jail are unused. The parts of the jail built in 2004 are unused. Why is this? It is our priority. It is our priority really in preventing better conditions for people who are incarcerated. Excuse me, let me correct that. It is our priority really. If our priority really is providing better conditions for people who are incarcerated, why are those pods not used to house people rather than the old section?
Mr. Brown, your time is up. Thank you.
Excuse my nerves.
Next is Kirk Bowers. Is Kirk here? He was. Well, may come back to him. Daryl Jones.
Good evening, Council.
Good evening.
My name is Daryl Jones. I live in the city of Charlottesville. I'm here on the behalf of the People Coalition. I'm here to talk about the new jail and the city council considering for interim finance to develop a proposal. Cages, not care, not cages. We are here to demand, instead of cages, money spent on preventing incarceration is a much better use of resources than one building a nicer cage. This means investments in affordable housing, mental health resources, and reentry program. Charlottesville has a housing crisis. We have all heard of the unhoused community members and the need of affordable housing. We need to invest in preventing incarceration, not building better jails. We we should be spending more money on community investments and preventing incarcerations, service and support to prevent people from going back to jail in the first place by not building a new place to confine them. And another thing, I think the money should be spent more in, with the way these youths are out here running rampant with guns and stuff like that, and the high rate of crime, money should be put into more of building something for them to, instead of looking at being violent, being gang members, because with that incident that happened over the weekend, or last week with that boy with that big gun, where the issue is he getting that gun from? Money need to be put into studying on what could be preventative of giving these children a better options. It look like the youth and the black and brown kids are being just put to the side. And another thing, I get it, if it's not affecting a lot of people here, they don't care about it. You know, it's not in your neighborhood, it's not that, but I think the money could be used wisely, and instead of building new cells, when you build them new cells and get new people in there, what you just gonna have them in there, just being in there without getting any resource or education or any guidance. Putting it and getting them some GEDs, putting that money into putting the people that you already got in here so they have a better option to looking forward for something to come out here, how to fill out resumes and stuff like that. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So we've got, I guess the next, we'll take the first person off the wait list is Ann Benham.
Hello, my name is Ann Benham. I live on Observatory Avenue in the JPA neighborhood. Since early in the zoning process, residents of our neighborhood have raised a number of concerns about the proposed rezoning of our area. We brought them up at a meeting with Mayor Snook and Councilor Purrier in August and emailed them to the whole council the day after that. But none of these concerns have been addressed at any of your meetings. We ask that you consider them before you vote on the new zoning code. First, please maintain residential zoning for the streets between Stadium Road and JPA. The draft code proposes RX3 zoning for these streets. That would allow buildings up to 175 feet wide, which would dwarf the existing 1 to 3 story houses in this area. Would also allow only 10% tree cover after 10 years of planting, which is a shockingly low figure. Whereas residential zoning would require at least 20% tree cover. The JPA neighborhood is already below the tree canopy standard for a healthy neighborhood. Furthermore, commercial development is not really suitable for these streets. Every resident lives or would live within 1 block of JPA, which is proposed to be zoned CX5. So there's really no need to add commercial uses to the narrow strip of side streets. Second, please do not make the intersection of Shamrock Road and JPA CX8. If you've been to Shamrock, you know it's very narrow and winding, and too much so to support 8-story buildings on each corner. At your November 1st work session, the topic of transitions between zoning categories came up, but not with respect to the JPA neighborhood. The draft zoning map allows CX8 zoning across the street from RX at Montebello Circle and CX5 adjacent to single-family homes on streets between Stadium and JPA. Please reconsider these transitions. Lastly, some urgent studies are needed before rezoning of our neighborhood. An infrastructure study to begin with, which was done for the RB and RC neighborhoods, but not for our neighborhood. And a traffic study for a neighborhood that already suffers from extreme traffic congestion. This study must include the extra traffic from the already approved student high-rises at 2005 and 1709 JPA, plus the future developments on Stribling and at the UVA Piedmont Housing Complex. And also, please consider how the proposed rezoning will result in a much greater heat island effect in the JPA neighborhood, with further cuts to our mature tree canopy combined with greatly increased impermeable surfaces from high-rise construction.
Thank you, Ms. Benham. Your time is up.
Thank you.
All right. Next, is Kirk Bowers, did he come back? I guess he went home. I know he was here earlier. Okay, so now we have 8 more spots. A few other folks had signed up and are on the waiting list. But contrary to popular belief, being on the waiting list doesn't mean you are automatically the next folks up. So I'm just going to, who else, are there other folks who would like to speak here today? Okay, let me take this woman here. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Tell us your name and where you live in 3 minutes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Salithia Carr. I live here in Charlottesville City. I wanted to talk about the jail. And everybody already know I am about affordable housing. Housing for every individual, especially low income. But however, this jail situation has definitely been on my mind. I am part of People's Coalition. I am the founder of Not Me, I Believe. I work for FAR. I'm a FAR organizer, community organizer. And this proposal, I did feel that you all should vote on it this time. Mental health is one of the biggest things that are happening to people, especially within incarceration. Having those people in incarceration, it doesn't help them for their mental health. It's not helping. What can help is outside. All of these organizations that are helping or are doing their things to help can eliminate a lot of the recidivism. And the Fountain Fund has done a lot to help this. They're helping the people. So putting this money, all this money into the renovations, no. Why are we wanting to put people in cages? We continue to want to lock them up. Why? They're not there all the time. They're not there. 30 days, I think, is what they said that most people are in there. That's not helping. That's not helping them at all. Education. Putting the money into education, putting the money into the all these other organizations, anti-bullying, the school system. Just that jail does not need it. They're not even using areas within the jail. I understand the new part needs to be, the old part needs to be fixed, but why aren't you housing them in the parts that is fixed? Money can go somewhere else. We can find other ways to help the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carr.
You're welcome.
That's it. Natalie?
Hello, good evening. Hello, City Council, staff, and fellow residents. I'm Natalie Oshrin, 531 Caroline Avenue. First, I want to reiterate a point from the Planning Commission meeting last week, supporting the 2117 Ivy apartment project and buildings like it. Charlottesville needs housing, and people are ready for big steps like this apartment complex. We can't be afraid of height. There is no objective reason why a shorter entrance corridor to a city is better. It's just what we're used to. A slow slide into less dense areas at the edge of town is how sprawl gets started. There are plenty of tall buildings in Charlottesville already, and tall buildings that are beautiful everywhere. Since Charlottesville is land constrained, we have to rely on infill and going up to create new opportunities for residents. I have a list and photo library of the tall buildings in Charlottesville that I will send over, so it's clear that tall buildings are not an anomaly here, or something to be seen as worse by default than a shorter building. From this informal survey, there are about 33 buildings in the city that are 5 stories or taller, and more than half of them are 7 stories or taller. The majority of them have been built in the last decade and a half. Tall buildings are all over the city and barely raise eyebrows once built. Here are some examples. The Apex Clean Energy Building, which is mass timber construction, is 7 stories. Crescent Hall is 8 stories. The Code Building is 9 stories. The Monticello Hotel is 10 stories and pretty. The Wells Fargo building on the mall is 8 stories, and 1800 JPA is 9 stories. Next, as it is Thanksgiving week, I want to express my gratitude that the strip of sidewalk on East High Street in front of the AT&T building is going in, and from the look of it today, nearly complete. Forcing people to trudge through the lawn or use their wheelchair on the street was tough, and I'm glad it will be safer now. I want to continue to urge further development of improvements like this throughout the city. There are many opportunities for sidewalks and raised crosswalks. We must keep going to make access safer for pedestrians, wheelchair users, parents with strollers, and generally more centered around people. Providing opportunities for people to live in and get around the city in a more environmentally friendly manner, more comfortably, efficiently, and safely without needing a car is what will make Charlottesville more human-scaled, not shorter buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Oshrin. Next. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm John Hossack, Davis Avenue. The first part of what I'm going to talk about tonight is basically a quote from a planning analysis by staff from last week applied to Langford Avenue. From the 21 comp plan, encourage incremental house size, contextual infill within existing residential neighbourhoods. Sub-strategy, where possible, prioritize the preservation of existing structures while encouraging a great intensity of use. Encourage infill development and reuse of or additions to structures rather than demolitions of existing structures to address gaps. This may include preserving existing structures and the use of accessory dwelling units, ADUs, building additions, and transitions of larger single-family housing to apartments. Protect and enhance existing distinct identities in the city's neighbourhoods. Utilize context-sensitive planning tools to maintain and enhance the distinct identities of Charlottesville's neighbourhoods and corridors. Sub-strategy require adequate transitions such as step down in the scales and intensity to mitigate impacts on adjacent residential and historic areas as well as cemeteries. Staff analysis. The rezoning is not consistent with the FLUM and the land use category description. Staff is concerned of the scale of the proposed development does not align with the land use category or implement context-sensitive infill and respect existing neighbourhood patterns and scale. The application's material indicate the proposed buildings will be taller, wider, and closer to the street than adjacent properties in typical patterns of neighbourhoods, i.e. RB, RC. Staff finds rezoning of the subject property would not be consistent with patterns of development along Langford Avenue and could negatively impact nearby residential properties. From the applicant material, staff finds that the properties to be rezoned, the proposed development would most likely comply with the zoning standards found within the chapter, but would not conform to the purposes set out at the beginning of the chapter, as the proposed development is not harmonious with surrounding area. This is what the developer Shimp said. However, where I think I went wrong was bringing a 3-story building to Langford Avenue streetscape, and upon looking at it and reading staff's comments and really going to the site, I want to amend and come back with two houses in front and keep the historic structures. This is a long way of saying that the comp plan and the draft zoning ordinance plan do not match. Your own staff seemingly identified a problem here, as apparently has a developer. The comp plan includes aspirational language seemingly not accounted for in the draft zoning ordinance. In other words, it's a step backwards from good planning practice. Please amend the draft zoning ordinance. It's not remotely close to being viable. For this and many other reasons, there's a big gap here that needs proper effort to address. Many of us have issues with the extreme plan, not because we have an issue with splitting existing structures and ADUs. We're for responsible zoning updates. What we object to is perhaps the most extreme rezone of it applied nationwide to a city of this scale. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Hossack. Next. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Ruby, and I'm a legal fellow with Legal Aid Justice Center. And I just wanted to say the 3 asks on behalf of the People's Coalition and Legal Aid Justice Center, along with the 20 groups that have over 20 groups that have signed on to our sign-on letter that I just passed back up there and was sent last week. First, the A&E firm should develop tiered proposals laying out different options for renovation and the costs for each one for the jail. This should not be an all or nothing proposal. Second, we demand that a task force of directly impacted people, their families, community providers, and reentry groups be convened to work closely with the firm and provide input and receive updates, after which they vote on which renovations, if any, to implement rather than the ECRJ board. Third, since this money comes from funds earmarked for capital assets, this task force should also be charged with providing input on other capital projects that Charlottesville can undertake, like building a shelter, transitional housing, trauma-informed crisis response housing, that can support community members to thrive and succeed. I also want to talk a bit about the mental illness point that has been raised. The additional square footage that is being proposed and the flex space that is being proposed is stated to be marked for people with mental illness. And here's what I want to say to you. You can't get well in a cell. No matter what we say, jails are not the place for mentally ill people. The tragic death of Mr. Frazier in August at the ACRJ is evidence of this. Jails and prisons, in fact, exacerbate mental illness and are the cause of PTSD. Incarceration is trauma. It doesn't make any sense to say that we need to build a nicer cage to lock up people with mental illness. For people with mental illness to succeed and be safe, we have to take care of our community members in crisis when they are out of jail. Connection and community is the antidote to isolation and disconnection. We have to invest in resources in non-law enforcement response, such as Marcus Alert, which is still unfunded, and wraparound services outside of a jail. Otherwise, people will just end up in jail. Budgets are moral documents. What we spend our money on, is a reflection of our values. Invest in community and in care, not cages. I also want to raise a second point here very quickly in my last 30 seconds, that Superintendent Kumar has stated that the average length of stay at ACRJ is a little over 30 days, about 37 days. People, when they are sentenced, they are transferred to DOC. Since most people have month-long stays, they cannot engage in any programming or mental health with any continuity. The jail is a short-term landing place for our community members in crisis. Again, we should focus on community services and release mechanisms. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Yes, ma'am. Okay. You ceded your time before, but I'll let you go anyway.
That was because I was afraid she wouldn't get to speak. So now I can. I'm Kate.
And frankly, if I had noticed that Ruby was in the same position, I would have said the same thing to
Okay,
her.
fair enough. I'm Kate Fraley. I'm a Charlottesville resident, and I'm here to talk about the jail renovation. I listened to the Nelson County and Albemarle County presentations, and I learned a couple of things from those. One was that the percentage of the responsibility that's on page 9 of your slides that you're going to see soon is going to be examined every year and could be changed. So since January, the percentage for Charlottesville on that same graph that was done in January has dropped 1.4% in less than a year. If you apply that success of dropping percentage, and it's based on occupancy day use, the number of days used by each municipality, you over 27 years, you would have saved, it will have saved the city $351,000. This shows the importance of external ways to avoid incarceration. So if we can lower the number of people who go to jail through the Marcus Alert program, which even in Albemarle County, Ned Galloway spoke about Fairfax and how wonderful their mental health programs were, and that they lowered the incarceration rate by quite a lot, high percentage. So I think that $351,000 that you're going to save ought to be spent on innovative programs to prevent people from going into jail. The second thing I learned was that the tier thing is going to work, and although I agree with the previous speaker that the city ought to get to vote on which tier, the way it stands now, the board's going to be making, according to the schedule, have one vote on the design, but the board should have two votes if it's not going to come to the city. It should have a vote to be which tier, and then a vote for the final design. The community engagement is scheduled for the entire year, February 2024 to February 2025, but the design approval is also February 2025. So the community engagement has to start immediately upon the hiring and the beginning of the term of Mosley's contract. It can't be spread out all the way until February because they'll be designing stuff before they know what we want. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fraley. Anyone else? Okay, seeing there are no other speakers at this point, I will close the Community Matters section. I'll remind you that there will be another opportunity to speak at the end of the meeting. So, action items. First action item is the jail renovation project. Ms. Marshall, are you presenting this or deferring to somebody else?
I will defer, but members of City Council and the City Manager, we do have Colonel Coomer here to speak with us, along with Mr. Courtney Rogers, who is a member of Davenport, should you have any questions. There is material in your packets also published for the public, and ACRJ's website also has been updated to reflect all available material to make sure people can review them.
Thank
Colonel?
you.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. As you know, I'm here tonight to ask you to approve a resolution authorizing the board to borrow the funding necessary for architectural and engineering services. I want to remind the city that this process started about 3 years ago when I presented some topics to the board that needed some attention. It was up until that time the jail's population was so large, it was almost prohibitive to actually do any type of major renovation or construction because every portion facility was at that time full. The previous time we had done a renovation to that degree, we had to send individuals to other parts of the state at a great cost, both localities and the family and friends of those individuals. Whereas now, with the part that is not being used, we can use that to house individuals during the construction phase. And with regards to those areas that aren't currently being used, they are being renovated as we speak by my staff. So the funds we're asking for at some point will not be used for significant renovation over there. We'll do that ourselves. We want to finish that before the construction starts. The individuals who move go into an area that has been renovated and the needs there have been met. So that's happening as we speak. Now, once I presented those at the time, my board said, well, if we're going to do this, what else do we need to do at this time? If we need to borrow money to do everything at once, let's do that. Let's take a look at it. Let's be responsible with how we do this as opposed to piecemealing the project. So we brought in a facility condition assessment, which identified a lot of mechanical needs, electrical, HVAC, and so forth. Then we decided, you know what, we want to leverage state funding, 25% for all eligible costs. Well, in order to do that, you have to do what's called a community-based corrections plan, which we did. Two parts of that plan. The first part, do you need to add new beds? The state doesn't want to invest in a facility only for you to come back 5 years later and say, hey, we need more money to add more beds. Well, they did the study, and as a testament to this community, our local prosecutors, our defense attorneys, probation, parole, support services, my staff, it's not needed. They suggest 15 years in the future, the beds in this facility will suffice. Wonderful news. However, the other part of the study is, what does the facility need in the future? And that's different. The oldest part of the jail, which is 50 years old, you have to remember, it's been occupied for 50 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Most buildings in any community do not receive that type of wear and tear. This facility has, especially the old portion. So we looked at everything the jail needed, and in order to apply for funding, you have to create a plan that meets everything in the CBCP. That's what Mosley Architects did. Normally, everything identified, the plan they submitted, would achieve that. Board of Local and Regional Jails looked at it, and one thing they said was they were impressed. Because for the first time in a long time, someone came to them and said, you know what, we don't want to add more beds. We don't want to incarcerate more people. We want to improve the jail for those who work, visit, and live there. Funding was approved. So we're here today to ask you for the funding to bring in an architect. They will work on the needs, make the facility ADA accessible, staff, visitors, inmates. The old part is not. Improve efficiency, bring in more toilets and showers, which are required now by code. HVAC, honest to goodness heating and cooling, ventilation in the old section. Program space, more office space, more conducive space for visitation. And the unit for the mentally ill inmates. I hear a lot about that they shouldn't be in jail. I agree. I'm not a mental health professional. That is not a mental health facility. However, people with mental illness will always come to jail, and there's nothing I can do about it. Now, what I'm talking about here is people with mild to moderate mental illness. They are not going to be diverted from jail. They're not. People who suffer from anxiety or depression, they're not going to be diverted. The court's not going to find them not guilty by reason of insanity, but it could be in my custody. I need some place to treat them as the best I can, so when I release them back to the community, they're better off than when I got them. And one thing to note, everyone has agreed some renovation needs to be done. Everyone agrees on that. The scope is what we're trying to decide. Architects and engineering services are needed for that process. In my RFP, in my negotiation with the contract, with the vendor, it's required they coordinate and work with the community. Present 3 options at the end of that coordination. My board will determine at the end which one we proceed with. I did that. I want to make sure the community is engaged in this process. If you have any questions regarding renovation, I'm happy to meet after Courtney Rogers.
Hey, Colonel Coomer, Mayor, members of council, good to see you. My name is Courtney Rogers. I'm with Davenport & Company. I'm the financial advisor for the jail board. We have presented to both the counties, and so we are here this evening to basically walk you through the financing process. And we talked about this, I think one of the ladies earlier said it was in January. We did a Zoom call with you all and kind of went through things. We were expecting to go through the General Assembly, and of course with the budget delays, it didn't happen. So we're a little bit later coming to you for this presentation. Yeah, that's it. Flip plate. Is there a flipper?
Where's the clicker?
Yeah, it might be on that.
It's on this
Oh,
podium.
there it is. Thank you. Sorry. Okay. So basically, the way the jail funding is a little bit different than when you go out and borrow money for a typical project that the city might do. There's actually 2 pieces to it. There's an interim financing portion, and then there's the permanent financing portion. So we're going to walk through that here. So as Colonel Coomer said, there is a 25% reimbursement from the state for eligible expenses. Part of that, you had to go through the plans, which you talked about, that the planning study that was done earlier and has been approved. That had to be approved before we could go to the General Assembly, and now we've been through the General Assembly, and that has been approved. So now we're ready to come before you, which is why we're here tonight, to get approval to move forward with interim financing. The interim financing will borrow only the money necessary to get the design up and running so that they can come back with a number that will know what the cost of the ultimate facility will be. Now, when we went through this financing, went through the study, the number that came out was $49 million. That's the number that they went to with the General Assembly, and that is a not to exceed number. You can't go back to the General Assembly and ask for more money, so it will be a number, either that number or below that number. So there's a 2-part, as I mentioned, the financing. One is going to do the interim. The second part is a little more involved. That's going to be the permanent financing, which will take out this interim. It also will have what's called a GAN, or Grant Anticipation Note, because that's the part that the state's going to reimburse, but they don't reimburse you until you're done with the project. So you actually have to go out and borrow that money. They're going to reimburse you for part of the interest, and then we'll have to fund the balance. So our assumptions, as I mentioned, is basically the $49 million that Mosley Architects came up with. There's really been no change to the absolute size since we talked in January. What has changed at the bottom of the page is we've now updated the percentages, as the lady earlier mentioned. Those numbers have been updated. They are updated on a rolling basis, and your number has shrunk slightly. For purposes of the presentation, we've assumed an interest rate of 4.5% for this bond anticipation note, the BAN, we're calling it, the interim financing. The projected cost, $4.150380, that is the cost of the design. We're looking at 18 months, basically, the term on this. As far as the schedule, we did go ahead and send the RFP out. We're trying to get this closed before the end of the year in order to meet the schedule with the 2 holiday weeks this week and then and Christmas holidays coming up. We went ahead and sent that out. Just so you know, if you all decide that we're not going to go forward with that, there's no cost to anybody. We just pull it off the street. But we did need to get that out. So the responses are due back in early December. We will come back to the authority board, who will approve the RFPs, and then go ahead and award that contract and get moving with the design. So in part 2, what we're expecting to come back and do that in terms of the assumptions right now, we're looking at a planning interest rate of 4.5% on the GAN. That would be a 3-year term to get us through construction. The permanent financing, we're assuming will be 30 years, 27 years of principal repayment, 2 years of interest only. So basically about 25 years of level debt service. We've been assuming 5.5% on the interest rate. Obviously, it's a long time out because that will be in 2025. And kind of looking at that schedule, again, design phase will begin in February, basically of 24, go through roughly a year, have those documented back in February of 25, final design in March of 25, so basically a year and a quarter out. Bids would come back in April, it's the projection, and we would go out and do a permanent financing in that April-May timeframe. Final completion of the project is scheduled for June of 2027. This is just to give you a sense of the impact on your budget. As you may know, this is not a CIP project that falls in your capital plan. It's actually in the capital plan of the authority. And so your portion with the allocation estimate is there in the first column when we have the localities, the last 3 columns there. The first column A is the BAN interest, B is the GAN interest, and then we've got the permanent financing there in C, totaled up there in column D, and then you'll see your 39.9% would be roughly $40,000 in 24, $80,000 in 25, then it jumps to a little over $1 million in 26 and 27, and kind of levels out at $1,050,000. And again, that's going to change year to year as your percentages change. This just assuming that the number didn't change, this is what your debt service would look like. So, happy to answer any questions. If there's questions on the design, Kerwin Coomer is here to answer those.
Council have questions? Comments?
I have a question to Colonel Coomer first. You talked about in the renovation, basically deferred maintenance, but you spoke about ADA compliance. That indicated to me that possibly what we are discussing as it relates to renovation is not currently ADA compliant. So if we're not ADA compliant, what does that mean?
The cells where the inmates live are not wheelchair accessible. The showers and the toilet areas are not wheelchair accessible. I have staff who may be in wheelchairs because they're injured at a certain time. There's a certain place in the facility they cannot go. Visitors entering the front part of the facility, the wheelchair ramp is not accessible. It requires staff to physically help manipulate the chair around the ramp. A lot of these things have been grandfathered in because of the age of facility. We have workarounds. Staff assist inmates with the things I've just described.
So these workarounds are legal?
They are grandfathered in. Legal, I do not know. I have not posed that question to the jail board authorities legal team.
So you also indicated that in the presentation by Davenport that stakeholders and/or community members there's going to be various types of forums, I guess, to have community input if this project moves forward. Why is the community input taking place after monies are appropriated?
The only way to actually have a constructive community engagement is to have someone at the table, the engineers, who know the laws, limitations of construction, security measures, what's required by the state for the reimbursement, what is allowed, what is not allowed, what happens if you touch this, how deep do you have to go? If you don't touch this, now that you've touched over here, are you required to then touch this to bring it up to code? That person has to be at the table, otherwise any discussion we have would still have to go before an architectural firm to see what's feasible.
So are you saying that the $49 million is locked in even when these discussions are happening and the architects realize it's going to be $55 million?
No, ma'am. Good question. Thank you. We're asking tonight for $4,150,000 for architectural and engineering services plus borrowing cost. They will help decide what the scope of work is. So once the community's had input, once the 3 projects are put forward and we've discussed them and our board makes a decision, whatever that final design is, we put out to bid. The contractor who bids on that will then determine the final cost of the final design chosen. It can't be more than $49 million, but but that's when the cost will be determined. So we are not locked into $49 million.
Oh. So if you're not locked into $49 million, it will mean that the municipalities will have to then come up with additional funds?
No, ma'am. No more than $49 million.
All right. Okay.
Another questions or comments?
I'm on the jail board, so I don't really have any questions. I feel like I've had a chance to ask those in our board meetings. I do have some comments about the renovation at some point if we want to talk about that. But if you're just asking about questions at this point, I don't have any questions.
Why don't we first look at questions? Any questions?
Yeah, I just have some comments. Just initially, I just want to say I will support the allocations, but with that, I just want to say that I've been in the jail. I've taught employment classes there. I've given a graduation speech there and had countless meetings in there for the reentry council meeting to talk about the drastic decrease in the population over the past 15 years, which I think is a great thing. We had those meetings in there. And I'm glad that, that it's a community goal that we have is to have that number at 0. But right now we do have 230, 240 people in there. And I think if we're going to have the community has decided that some individuals have violated the law to the point they have to be incarcerated, that we want to have the most humane conditions as possible. And in being in there so many times, I think that we need these improvements. And that being said, I will, be looking for, improvements for things that will help the community, like the library improvements, the what's going on over the other side of town. We have invested a lot in our schools, but I know that there's more that we can do. But I did have a couple of questions. So, Mr. Mayor, are we waiting on the questions now?
No.
Okay. One is that several people spoke about some unused space, and if you could talk about that, and if you could just talk a little bit more about what you envision that community input being, because we have some, you have a great starting point with individuals that spoke tonight to get their input on it. So that's my 2 questions about the unused space and what that community input will look like.
So the unused space, in 2000, the population, there was a CBCP study done at that time, population was be significantly higher than it was now. So that was designed for low to medium risk individuals, inmates, the way it was designed. The population today is high risk. If you look at the newspapers, all the crime that's happening, types of crimes, our inmate population is high risk now. That housing is not designed for the type of population we have now. We will use it, but it was designed for that purpose. It's like taking some high schoolers and putting them in elementary school. It'll work, but but it's not optimal.
They're like pods or something like
They
that?
are direct supervision pods, yeah. We are using one now. Another one's currently being renovated. So, and we'll switch people around to renovate the other one as well, when we do need to use it. With regards to community input, over the last 3 years, I've been conducting tours when we didn't have COVID. Open to the public, anybody. I always tell people, friends, neighbors, coworkers, anybody. Come on down. Sit down with me, have a conversation. I'll show you what I'm talking about. I've reached out to Community Coalition several times over the last year to have a meeting, to begin this process. For whatever reason, we haven't been able to meet. I believe in community engagement. 27 years I've been engaged with the community. I've served on some of the same committees want to serve on. So I believe in it. Over the next course of the year, you will see it. It will be meaningful, and it will be impactful. But the final design will be chosen by the board. But we will have community engagement.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilor Payne, any questions?
Sure. A few questions. One, just basically on the timeline, so just to help me make sure I understand it. So the timeline is if this interim financing was approved, 3 different designs would be produced over the next year or so. The jail board would then vote on the final design, and then it would go back to Charlottesville City Council as well as the other localities for final approval of the design that they chose. Is my understanding correct?
The final design will be chosen by the jail board authority. It will then be submitted for bid. The final cost will come back. That final cost will be brought back before all 3 jurisdictions for approval.
Right. Okay. So we'll approve the final cost.
Yes, sir.
And the largest concern I have in terms of the cost is just looking at the cost inflation of other infrastructure projects we've invested in over the past couple of years have seen significant increases. You said that the cost of the localities will be locked in at $49 million, or how will that work if there is a significant cost escalation just in terms of materials, construction above where we are right now?
There are some escalation factors used in the estimate given by Mosley, so some of that's already been factored in, but the cost is not to exceed $49 million. So if we get a bid back that is more than that, we'll have to go back and kind of rework some things, kind of get that cost down a little bit. So, and that's assuming that, the cost comes in at the maximum to begin with.
Okay. And then, so they'll come back with 3 different tiers of designs. What is structuring what those tiers are? Is it simply tiers of the extent of the renovation, or is there other criteria in terms of what those 3 options will be?
It's kind of left open intentionally. I don't want to pigeonhole the process or the input from the community. So it is kind of vague, but there is kind of a bare bones minimum. Let's, replace the antiquated aging systems. Let's make as much facility we can ADA accessible. Certain things limit that because you have poured concrete and narrow doorways have to be demolished anyway, to a kind of a middle ground into the full-blown proposal submitted to the state.
Mm-hmm. And I believe you stated this, but just to confirm it. So for any of the 3 tiers that come in, they may result in a square footage increase of the facility, but none of those options will result in an increase in the number of beds, correct?
Correct. Regardless of what happens with the renovation, there will be not a single additional bed added to the jail, period, no matter which design is chosen.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on this a little bit with the Vice Mayor's question in terms of community engagement. Do you know at this point what the community engagement will look like over the next year? Even in terms of high-level timeline and then process, will it be focus groups, survey, kind of, is that known?
I do know surveys of our inmate population. We've reached out to family and friends who want to participate as well. We'll open up to the community in general, anybody who wants to come, and we'll try and meet the needs of the facility within reason. I mean, this could be negotiated and talked about for the next 5 years. So there has to be some limitation, but we also want to actively have a meaningful discussion. But again, it has to be some parameters. But that will be determined once we get the A&E firm in. I mean, there are some very broad parameters now, but again, I don't want to make them so strict that we get to a point where we need more and we can't do it. So it's flexible.
In addition to the broader community, inmates as well would be part of that community engagement
Yes,
process?
they'll be surveyed. Everyone will get a survey, and we'll come in and meet with individuals, groups, and individual inmates for the feedback as well.
Okay.
So yes, including my staff.
Those are all the, or one more question. So for the interim financing, for this portion, the interim financing to begin the process of getting those bids, that cost is $4 million. My understanding is it correct that that is a cost that is split between the localities?
Correct. That debt service will be split among the 3 localities. Now, there's obviously financing things that go into that, but all the cost will be negotiated, or excuse me, will be split among all 3 localities based on the share of the inmates' days that they have inside the facility.
Right, and that's applying for this roughly $4 million interim financing as well. Okay, that's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
May I have a question?
Sure.
So if the numbers, okay, this $4 million I get is going to be divvied up between the municipalities, but you've already said that the number of people in Charlottesville has gone down. So if your Charlottesville population continues to go down, what does that do to our fair share?
So we use a rolling 5-year average, and that's done every single year to determine your share of the population.
Okay.
So if your average goes down, you pay less of a share. The full debt service has to be paid.
I understand.
But your portion will vary based on your percentage of the share of the bed days.
I understand.
So the more you go down means the more Albemarle County or Nelson County will pick up.
Okay.
And vice versa. If the city goes up, the county goes down, you would pay more, they would pay less.
I understand. So my next question is, bare minimum for the deferred maintenance as it relates to renovation would be heating and air conditioning, I would assume. ADA compliance, whatever we need to do as it relates to that. Is there any lead or asbestos in that facility?
We've had tested over the years. There is none now in the places where we've tested, but we won't know until every square inch or the appropriate test of everything they're going to touch. With the areas we've had tested, there are no lead paint or asbestos.
And there would be none in your relocation?
No, there is none there. That was built in 2000.
All right. Explain to me the mental health aspect. How is mental health, i.e. location in the facility that is proposed to be renovated, going to be addressed? I'm not talking about the people that administer the services for mental health, because you may have to hire more people, but I'm talking about the space, because you just said there will be no more beds, so I'm just presuming that we're talking about, I don't know, 100 beds, let's say, because I'm a very visual person. And you're not going to increase that 100-bed space in the older section. But how are we going to develop a space for mental health beds if we're not increasing square footage? Unless you're saying to me, we already have it and we're just going to improve it. What are you saying?
Okay, great question. We're going to use some of the general population beds we're currently not using and convert those to mental health beds. So we're not adding more beds, we're taking beds from here and moving them here and redesigning them. We don't currently have them. We have no dedicated beds that are used for the treatment of mental illness. We have suicide cells. That is something completely different. These will be trauma-informed housing areas. They will be connected to our medical unit for more beds. It's environments that more natural sunlight, sounding materials, so we are not constantly bombarding people with mental illness. with outside influences.
Okay. So this is very helpful. Many years ago, I had to go to Lorton on a regular basis. I have been to the current facility years ago to visit someone that was incarcerated. I've been to the facility for GED graduations and other events. I don't feel that because people do something that is deemed wrong, that requires incarceration, whether it's for a day, a month, or a year, or beyond, that they need to be in substandard environments. Because I make a mistake, I should not be treated like I'm a subhuman person. I have had experience with incarceration of family members, from petty crime to federal crime. I have been to the facility recently, and I would not want anyone, whether they are a family member, whether they're someone I know living in the community, or myself, to have to be there. Because it just is not right. What is often right and just is difficult. But I don't see any equitable anything in our current system. In the building where you go every day to work. And I just needed to say that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other comments?
A comment, are we still in questions or?
We've sort of morphed into comments. Go ahead.
Did you have anything you wanted to say?
Well, I guess what I would say, I would venture a guess that over the last 40 years, I've spent more time in the jail than anybody other than yourself in this room right now. And I want to comment in particular on the recent changes that you mentioned in sort of the nature of the people who are there now. One of the good things that Charlottesville, to a large extent, Albemarle also, have done in the last few years is to cut down on pretrial incarceration, to eliminate cash bonds, to get people out on home electronic monitoring or home electronic incarceration or various other forms of community supervision. And one of the things we've found is that for most of those people, they don't need intense supervision. They don't need jail. But I've also seen in my own clientele a real concern that there's some folks over there who are not really safe to have on the street. And I can't justify not having a jail, and I can't justify having a jail with lousy conditions, and I've seen a lot of lousy conditions there over the years. Things have gotten better recently, and certainly the improvements back in 2000 were a big part of it, but there's still places in there that the heating and air conditioning and plumbing and electrical and everything else is 50 years old, and it was probably conceptually 50 years old at the time it was installed. So it's really not a very good situation. It is not well adapted to programs. It is not well adapted to educational and drug programs and mental health programs and so on. And I understand that part of what you're looking to do here is to have more spaces that are readily adaptable to those kinds of programs. And the decision about who goes to jail is not a decision that you make, and it's not a decision that any of us make. It's a decision that judges make, or juries, but ultimately judges. And the judges do so to a large extent as influenced by the prosecutors, but it's still the judge's decision, and we don't elect a judge, not directly anyway. We have had judges who believed in the power of incarceration as a corrective behavior, a correction for behavior. I think they were largely wrong, at least for an awful lot of the people. But that's what they believed, and we know that there is a cycle in public policy that goes from more tolerant to more restrictive, and I hope we aren't going to go back. I hope we have actually learned some of the lessons of the last few years, but I have my doubts. In any event, I think it is inevitable that we need to have a jail and that we need to have a modern jail. And I appreciate the fact that there will be an effort to determine through these tiers that you've mentioned exactly how we're going to do that in a way that is in fact consistent with what Charlottesville and Albemarle and Nelson truly need. So I think that the $4 million is absolutely a good investment. I note we all got the letter from the coalition of folks, the community groups opposing it. One of the things that was being objected to was the notion, maybe it wasn't in the letter, maybe it was in one of the other bits of correspondence I got, that we were proposing to spend, originally it was going to be $5 million, $5.4 million or something like that on this project. And how dare we put it out for an RFP before we had gotten through this approval process. And I noted, for one thing, that we had gone from a $5.4 million estimate for that kind of interim services to $4.1 million, largely because if we had told everybody up front that we had $5.4 million to put to this, I have a funny feeling most of the bids would have come back about 5.35. So we were able to save a fair amount of money, and you were able to negotiate some good conditions for the tiering process, which of course are actually required in the RFP. So I think a lot of the things that people have been concerned about, you all have already touched on. And I'm encouraged by that as well. That's a long way around to say I think that we're in a good place now with the $4 million. It's always wise, I think, to spend money on planning before we jump in, and that's essentially what you're looking to do, and I think it's a good idea, and I'm going to vote in favor of it. So.
Just have one, were you going to say?
Yeah, just briefly, I think the mayor and others have said this better than I could, but I just want to say, as a member of the jail board, since Councilor McGill stepped down back in January, I've been just really impressed by your management, sir, of that facility and the evident compassion that you bring and professionalism that you bring to your work. And many of the things that have been brought up by various folks in terms of mental health resources, educational resources, I've never seen an option like that come up where you weren't like, yeah, let's figure out how to do this. The word progressive is overused, but I would say it's a very progressively run facility. And people, not cages, of course. I mean, no one wants to put people in any kind of incarceration, but my guess is that for most of the remainder of my life, I don't know, maybe some other form will come about. We have reduced a lot and will continue to do that, but we need a place, and it's not safe or wise to not have a place in our community where people that need to be away from the rest of the community, it's not we need a place for those folks to be. And that's why we have that facility. And so I think that this is an appropriate project. I think that it's been thoughtfully done so far. I think one thing we're forgetting is that 25% of the funding from this is coming from the state. So I see it as an investment in an asset that this community needs and will continue to need. And the longer we wait on it, the more it will cost. The one thing I will say, as someone who spends his life doing renovations, is that it will be hard. And particularly when you talk about mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems in a facility that old, it's like, you don't just sort of go in like Hermione Granger and just, magic those systems out. You have to demolish them. You have to build new systems. There may be some phasing involved. It's complicated work. It's like trying to disentangle a sweater. But in any event, I think that this is an appropriate use and a wise use of our city's funds, and so I plan to support it.
Yeah.
May I ask one question? You've spoken a lot about community involvement and community engagement. We have a letter here from several organizations within the community. When those sessions are held, they must be held in the community.
Mm-hmm.
People must be able to get there.
Amen.
And so I urge you and your board to find those locations. And if you have difficulty in finding those locations, I know that the signers of the letter will help you find those locations. And you may go to places that your board has never been. But what we hope is that our numbers continue to go down so that people that are living in this community don't have to go to where you work. And that if people that are in the community have been where you work, they don't come back.
I think that hits a really good point. One of the emphasis on this renovation is also the staff that work there, that this renovation is also for them.
Yeah.
Would you entertain a motion at this point?
Please.
Okay. I would move for the resolution, the City of Charlottesville to approve the issuance of obligations for improvements to the Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail Authority facilities.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Now, I note that the document, the certification of adoption of resolution requires that the votes be recorded, but Madam Clerk, is that something simply that you write in or type in? Yes. We don't have to sign it or anything? Okay. All right, so there being nothing further to do but to vote, let's vote. And Councilor Payne, what is your vote?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we have 5 yes, no nays, no abstentions. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your service.
Yeah. So next resolution to approve appropriation for the assignment of the contract to acquire 510 Caroline Avenue, 532 Caroline Avenue, 0 East High Street, second reading. Mr. Sanders?
So I'll just briefly mention that this is in regards to the property that we refer to as 0 East High for the amount of $5.9 million. There's been no new development since this item was presented to you earlier this month, but I will look over to the city attorney and ask if there's anything that he would like to add as an update in this matter. But we are, at this moment, moving forward.
If council, I would just say this, Mr. Mayor, if council approves this resolution, we'll be on track to wire the deposit to the closing agent tomorrow and be on track to close at the end of the month.
Okay.
And I would just reiterate for the benefit of the public that there is no plan for this site at this time. I have not prioritized when there will be a plan, but I promise there will be robust community engagement whenever we are ready to embark on such a plan.
Okay.
I'm all about robust meetings.
That's how I like my coffee.
Yes, yes.
Robusto.
Just make it clear.
Rigorous and robust. Thank you, Mr. Sanders.
All right.
Can I
You want to
make a motion?
You may.
Please.
See if I
You
can do
may.
this here. I move the resolution to approve appropriation for the assignment of contract to acquire 510 Caroline Avenue, 532 Caroline Avenue, and 0 East High Street, an amount not to exceed $6 million.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Any discussion? I think we discussed it rather extensively last time, and we've been discussing it in various ways, shapes, and forms for months. So, being nothing further to do, shall we vote? Counselor Payne, what's your vote?
Yes.
Yes, okay, 5-0. The motion is approved. Thank you. Next item, the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission, TJPDC, proposed legislative program for 2024. David Blunt to present.
Evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Thank you for time on the agenda here this evening. And before you, for your consideration and hopefully approval tonight, is a very robust draft 2024 regional legislative program. With the exception of Ms. Purrier, I think for the other 4 counselors, it will probably look very similar to what you had seen heading into the 2023 legislative session. But if I could just spend a few minutes talking about the priority items and then a few of the other legislative positions, I would like to do so. The first priority that's proposed for the 2024 legislative program is support for additional state funding for K-12 education. This continues to be the top priority among the localities in the region, and I think the position was really boosted in the past 6 months or so by the release of the JLARC report, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and I think really told us all what we already knew, and that is that the state has been underfunding its commitment to K-12 education. We saw some additional funds were put into K-12 in the September budget for the current fiscal year. I would expect that we will see additional funding proposed in the budget that will be coming forth in December, as well as being considered by the General Assembly starting in January. Second priority deals with budgets and funding. This is really kind of a all-encompassing position that takes into account the local government's support for additional state funding for local programs, actually state programs that are carried out locally. It also captures the we don't want unfunded mandates position. And then it also says that we don't want the state to restrict or curtail our local revenue sources. And there are no changes that were proposed to this priority statement from last year. The third priority is one that's being elevated from the past several years where it's been as a legislative position. Every year we see proposals come forward, some that we anticipate, a lot that we don't, that would circumvent or erode local authority in the area of land use and growth management. And so we thought that it would be, I thought that based on the past, that it would be a good idea this year, particularly with a lot of uncertainties going into the session, a lot of new faces that will be in the House and the Senate, that we give some higher priority and a little higher profile to the importance of this local authority headed into the General Assembly session this year. So the statements that are in the position are not new to the program. They were in the program as part of a legislative position. They're just being elevated to a higher priority. Following the priorities, the legislative position section of the program really focuses on positions, concerns in those areas outside of the priority areas that are of most interest and concern to local governments in the region. There was a short memo in your packet followed by a one-page summary of some of the major changes in this section of the program. I'll mention just a few of them. In the area of economic development, there's some additional language endorsing support for the Business Ready Sites program. In the education section, I would point out actually a continuing position that actually reiterates one of the positions that you have coming up next in your local legislative program to support localities having the option to enact an additional 1-cent sales tax to be used for school construction. There is some added language in the environmental and water quality section related to support for state funding for the development of regional water supply plans, which is a coming requirement from the state. In the general government section, there is some added language supporting state funding to add capacity to state agencies for certain administrative functions. Heard from some of the other localities in the region a concern about different state agencies taking so long to review applications, review permits, process those. So we're asking for some additional support in that area. Also wanted to state, since I know that short-term rentals continues to be an item of great interest in the city, that there is still some strong language in support of local authority related to these types of businesses. That's in both the general government and in the land use section. And then finally, I would just mention in the Health and Human Services section, there's some added language supporting the stability of TANF funding. There is some discussion at the state about having to, there's anticipation of perhaps a shortfall in TANF funding and some discussion about how they're going to be able to make that up in the fiscal year 25 budget. Mr. Mayor, those are the items I wanted to point out to you all this evening. Glad to take any questions you may have, or if there are any suggestions that you have for additional changes to the program. I would just also note, in talking with your city attorney, there is a note in the memo that he prepared for this item, some past differences where council has taken a different stand in two different positions that are contained in the program.
Nothing.
And just so folks will know, those two provisions are the TJPDC legislative agenda says, we oppose legislation mandating expansion of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act's coverage area, and Charlottesville has historically dissented from that view. So that's one. And the second change is one that said the state should maintain the principles of sovereign immunity for local governments and their employees to include regional jail officers. And again, Charlottesville has historically dissented from that view. And if you look at the bottom of the document, there's an asterisk that says position statement, that are asterisk, not endorsed by the city of Charlottesville. So,
and if council chooses to go that route, we certainly make note of that in the final version of the legislative program that is distributed.
And I'll just say I certainly support that motion, and in particular not including support for the General Assembly not touching sovereign immunity. I also don't have any specific language, but I will just say on the land use and growth management piece, the language there is broad. I doubt we're going to see even General Assembly legislation this session. Some of it's positive in terms of probably allowing more localities to do inclusionary zoning, but I am uncomfortable with some of it in the sense that, as we're embarking on our zoning reform, we're 10.5 square miles. Our region is literally thousands of square miles. And at the Planning District Commission, we hear all the time about how our surrounding localities are blocking development of both housing, solar panel construction, which is having an enormous impact on our regional housing market, even if we make significant zoning changes within our 10 square miles. And I do think it would be appropriate for the General Assembly to play a role, as state legislatures have in other states, in encouraging zoning reform and the construction of more housing at a state level. So I will just say I'm uncomfortable with some of the blanket language there, which I worry could kind of prohibit those approaches at the state level. But
is there excuse me, is there particular language that you're thinking about? I'm looking at the section on land use and growth management, and I think I understand what they are saying when they say we oppose legislation that would, and number 2, single out specific land uses for special treatment without regard to the impact of such uses in particular locations. It's sort of vague, but Mr. Blunt, what is that really getting at?
That is actually when I made reference to the positions on short-term rentals. There's language in both the general government section. That particular clause number 2 was intended to be some additional protection, if you will, in that regard. And that was just kind of something crafted in conjunction with previous city attorney. If that makes you all uncomfortable, I don't think it does any great harm to take that out, because it is, as you said, Mr. Mayor, very vague language, very general.
I can't figure out whether I think it's a good idea or a bad idea. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I mean, we oppose legislation that would single out specific land uses for special treatment without regard to the impact of such. I mean, it seems so heavily contextualized as to be almost meaningless.
I assume that somebody would have to propose a fairly specific bill. And if we look at this as instructions to our legislators as to what we want them to do, first of all, we'd have to assume that they would recognize that that language was intended to apply to Airbnbs, which they may not, but I don't know. I
mean, it seems like a benign enough statement, honestly. Yeah. I don't know that it's...
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly live with, I don't think it will have any policy impact to keep or remove it, quite honestly. So I'm happy to keep it forward and move forward with the suggested staff motion regarding the Chesapeake Bay Act and sovereign immunity. But I just note, I can see this over time going in a direction that will get more specific and harmful.
Then we'll have to pay attention next year.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Michael.
Okay, so are we basically good with this resolution here?
I'm happy to make the motion. I move to approve the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission's 2023 legislative program.
2024. Does the resolution say 2023?
2024, that's typo.
Okay.
I move to approve the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission's 2024 legislative program as presented to council on November the 20th, 2023, with the exception of its opposition to expansion into the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act's coverage area and its opposition to considering revisions to the doctrine of sovereign immunity.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Once we got the dates all right? Okay, let's vote. Mr. Payne?
Yes.
Yes, okay, 5-0. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Blunt.
much.
All right, so the next item is council's own proposed legislative agenda, and this is frankly the result of a number of pieces of Charlottesville's government coming up with ideas of their own, plus added to things like the discussion of the 1 cent local sales tax increase for school construction. But our version of things starts at page 129 and goes on to page 130, and I think it covers the most important things that various agencies and employees of ours have said to us over the course of the last year. The school sales tax, continue funding for Virginia's home visiting programs, and the funding for regional transit authorities. Then E is to amend land use ordinance advertisement laws that unduly restrict council's ability to deliberate. That's this business that we've been getting into recently, where we have to make sure that we say the magic words each time we have a public hearing. Otherwise, we could be required to actually vote at that meeting or the next meeting or something. And it seems most observers think that maybe the General Assembly didn't really realize what they were doing when they drafted this recent amendment, so maybe they will amend it back. We also want to allow greater flexibility for various boards and commissions to have all virtual meetings, to increasing affordable housing accessibility by enhancing tenants' rights. The one thing I did not read, because frankly I don't feel very strongly about it, but if you all do, that's fine, is C, we support legislation to amend Code of Virginia 15.2, 1414.6 to remove the limitation on annual salaries for city councils. As you know, we are limited at the moment to $20,000 for the mayor and $18,000 for the rest of the council. There are many jurisdictions that have no limitation. So we could ask to be added to the list of those for whom the limitation has been removed.
I think it's fine to keep C in there.
Okay. Anybody else have any thoughts?
No. I'm good with what was presented.
Okay. Anybody have any?
Likewise, and
I'm sorry?
Likewise, and would just note for the public, the new addition this year of the requesting funding for the Regional Transit Authority. And just want to highlight, if anyone Googles Regional Transit Governance Studies, Charlottesville, that's really our avenue towards getting to 10, 15-minute routes, which are included in both the constrained, unconstrained vision. Even in the constrained vision, that cost is about $40 million. Unconstrained, that cost is about $90 million. That's just local cost. So our avenue to affording that is through that. We'll require a lot of advocacy over the coming years to get that done, but I think we can. But that's it.
And so there are other regional transit authorities in Virginia that have specific legislation authorizing them to have various funding mechanisms. And we actually have the authority to create a regional transit authority. We just don't have the authority to get any money for it. So that's effectively stopping it from doing anything. If everybody is good with this the way it is, somebody want to make a motion?
I move to approve the statement of the City Council's 2024 legislative positions as presented by Council's Legislative Committee on November 20th, 2023.
Second.
Any discussion? Not, let's vote. Councilor Payne?
Yes.
Okay, 5-0. Thank you. So that is the end of our general business, or of our specific action items. Is there any other business item for deliberation or consideration by council? Or anything that we want to ask the city manager to follow up on? I think the city manager's already given himself a long enough to-do list. I don't think we need to add much more to it.
And he thanks you.
Okay, so we're now at the final speaking opportunity for members of the public. Individuals in council chambers may raise your hand, be recognized by the mayor to speak. Speakers will be given up to 3 minutes. Ms. Fraley.
Again, I get to speak again. So this is about the jail and some response to some questions you had. Councilor Puryear, you were asking about legality and code violations, and so I want to just bring up another worry that I have, or another question I have about that related to double bunking. So in the past, when the census was really high, the jail got to double bunk. So in fact, in the 2000 building, there are 3 pods, 40 each, for a rated capacity of 120, and actually there are double that many beds, physical beds, in those spaces. So each of those pods has 80 beds in it. That's why where so many people are in the old section, because that's double bunked also. So there are the operational beds and the rated capacity beds are completely different. I don't know whether when they talk about how many beds might move upstairs, whether that includes double bunking or not. So when they say they're going to do all this with new spaces, they are going to demolish the first floor, rebuild a first floor, and add a second floor. So there's more square footage, not more rated capacity. So that's one issue. And I don't know whether if that opening up of those beds and demolishing those beds will impact the double bunking. Superintendent Coomer said they're not going to take the double bunks out of the 2000 now because they'll need them when they have to move people from the old section over there. But he said that they will move them out when, so I'm hoping, so one of the reasons for this renovation, they say, oh, well, we'll have more room. Each incarcerated person would have more room. Well, they can have more room if they take the beds out, because if there are twice as many beds as 329, and they're only at 2 something now. The other thing I wanted to mention was about the average length of stay. That everybody was saying 30 days, but we have to keep in mind that there's something like 40% of the people who are registered into the jail stay less than 48 hours. That's a lot of people. And something like 43% are innocent. They're awaiting trial. So when you think about anyway, that's one thing. I have been keeping track of all my notes for all these subjects, and I'm going to send you a copy and highlight the double bunking part and the average length of stay part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak? All right, so there being nobody else wanting to speak at this point, we will end the community matters, and we have nothing further to do, so we are adjourned until Monday, December 4th. And everybody have a happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving and be safe.
Session on November 29th.